Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It is a weekend edition, brand new show airing on Saturdays and Sundays. The weekend edition. Happy to have you with us today. And I tell you what, to kick off our inaugural show, folks, we have two very special guests with us. Provost from Liberty University, Dave Bratt, a longtime Schaftlein Report alumni, and Jason Bermas, host of Making Sense of the Madness. Gentlemen, welcome to the Saturday show. Happy to have you with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Mark.
Hey, listen, guys, we got a lot to cover today, and we're sort of recapping some things and talking about a momentous week, really, and what's going on with the American economy. Dave, I want to start with you. You know, something is not making sense out there, and I can't actually put my finger on it. I mean, I just don't get it. The S&P 500 is hitting all-time highs.
Yeah.
The Nasdaq, powered by NVIDIA, Microsoft, and a handful of others, all-time highs. And we're having a situation where Bitcoin, all-time high. Jason, I know you're going to talk about that. But Dave, something's not connecting with the American people. Because traditionally, when the stock market's hitting record highs, the American people are participating in the economy. Explain to our viewers what the heck is going on here, because this is not an equal participation.
No, of course not. The Magnificent Seven, right? The 7 top U.S. stocks are worth more than all European countries combined, right? So 10% of the upper wealthy crew own 90% of the wealth. 10% own 90% stocks, bonds, whatever. The thing that's missing is, of course, everything's doing good, right? When the government goes over here and says, hey, Uncle Sam, please give me $2.5 trillion in deficit spending, and then you shove it in the Keynesian multiplier, and that $2.5 trillion becomes $5 trillion stimulus thanks to the multiplier. $5 trillion is a lot of money, right? The economy is about $25 trillion. So you just jacked up the economy by 1/5. What's missing, of course, is the consequences of that. The younger generation has to pay off the debt. We're $50 trillion in debt, according to CBO, in 9 more years. $50 trillion at 5% interest rates is $2.5 trillion in interest payments on the debt per year in 9 years. Right now, it's $1 trillion. And we have to repay $12 trillion this year at the highest interest rate. And so, but the doozy also out at CBO, this, no one will get this or pay attention to it, but this is the sentence. CBO has our productivity growth at 1.5% for the next 20 years. And therefore, GDP per capita, which is productivity, will also be 1.5% growth per year for the next 20 years. And GDP is the best measure of human welfare. And so there's the answer to your question. The American people don't feel good because they are rational. They get it in the gut. They get it when they go to the store. And I didn't even throw in the inflation piece, the 20% loss in purchasing power. That's not only on what's in your wallet when you go to the supermarket. That 20% loss of purchasing power also affects every dollar in your retirement account. Right? When you pull any of those dollars out, they're no longer worth $1. It's worth 80 cents on all your future purchases. You just got wiped out 20% due to the Federal Reserve running 9% inflation, and then 6%, and then 4% and 3%, right? So you lost 20%. Prices are still going up. Inflation's at 3 or 4. Prices are still going up. They're not going down. The American people get all this, and so that's why they feel rightly so that they're being ripped off.
Well, they are being ripped off, Dave Bratt. And let me ask you this, Jason, to shift over. You're in Iowa. You're in the heartland of the country. You know, you talk about what you have to do when you have to stretch dollars on groceries, on clothes. You talk to a lot of people. You do a talk show. You're talking radio. You're talking streaming, television. What are your viewers and listeners telling you? Because you're in the belly of the real economy. And I know what Dave said is correct, but tell me from an Iowan's perspective, is he spot on, or is it more nuanced than that?
No, he's spot on. In fact, I'd say it's way more than 20%. You know, I often just go to a gallon of water. All right. Now I could get a gallon of distilled water from a Walmart, a Target, somewhere at the 88 cents marker, not even a year ago, maybe a little bit more than a year ago, I guess, somewhere in there, but maybe it was up to $1 at that point. It's $1.38 for any of those right now. We're talking about water, bare minimum. Eggs went down for a little bit. They were around $1 a dozen, which, you know, is pretty standard when you're out in farm country, whether it be here in Iowa or upstate New York, where I was originally from. $3+ a dozen. Gas has never really come down. Even premium out here in Iowa, I pay about $4 for a gallon. I know you're envious of that, Mark, and all you people over in California are envious of that too, but that's a lot for me. There's just so much in regard to inflation. And then I look at like these big tech companies, the big seven that he talks about. One of them is Facebook. You know, Facebook doesn't really provide anything. It took a big hit on Meta, and somehow, some way, it's still making those dollars. Google would be another one of these companies. Google, especially because of its direct involvement with government contracting and the NSA and NASA in quantum computing, artificial intelligence, etc. You know, back in the day when Eric Schmidt was heading that organization up, he basically bragged that they were paying no taxes. And when he was called out on it, he's like, well, I guess you could fix the code. Meanwhile, a guy like me is paying real taxes and subsidizing, you know, another situation where there's an influx of people coming in through the border. People say, Jason, you're in Iowa, that doesn't affect you. I'm in a satellite city of Chicago. I drove down the street the other day in Davenport, and there was a Muslim woman with a sign saying she and her family were refugees and anything would help. You know, it's people like us that are subsidizing the credit cards, et cetera. And it is very disillusioning. In this same neighborhood, which is really, look, I love where I live, but it's nothing special. A 5-bedroom home, $900,000, Mark. Things are getting out of control for the little guy.
Well, let me let me add to that. I mean, mortgage rates are knocking on 7%, and you cannot have a situation where you have interest rates rising, real estate prices rising, and the young buyers are basically frozen out of the marketplace. I mean, Dave Bratt, I want your economic analysis on this, and please explain it for our audience. Why do these Federal Reserve officials and government statistics always talk about, well, we have to exclude food and energy costs? You know, you're right, Jason. Here in California, it's still $5.50 a gallon. So, Dave, walk us through why they do that to us. Is it deception, or do they not want us to feel the pain that we're all feeling?
Yeah, no, that's just technical mumbo jumbo. The major point is the Federal Reserve kept the interest rate at 0% for a decade, and the American people are like sheep and didn't ask any questions. Like, that's kind of not normal, is it? And of course, the rich, the wealthy got wealthy. But just to go back to you, what's the economic answer? The other thing I left out of the last conversation is trade, right? We, in addition to productivity, has been going down for 60 years in a row, right? The lead economist in the world on that is at Northwestern University, Robert Gordon. He's probably not a conservative, right? So I'm not picking, winners here. Productivity has been going down for 50, 60 years in a row, straight line down. When tech went up, this is the new argument. This is in a recent Brookings paper. When technology began shooting up in the 80s and then 90s, it took off somewhat. Even Gordon back then said, yeah, I see technology everywhere, except in the data. It's not showing up in the data, and it's surely not widespread. Now, the latest data on artificial intelligence says all this stuff is only seeped down through about 20% of firms, meaning that the rich are getting super rich, right? So the Magnificent Seven, that's without AI. Now you're going to throw AI in there. You're going to displace more workers, and then you're going to trade away the good manufacturing jobs in this country to go get cheap labor in other countries. So when you say, why can't the young person buy something or whatever, it's not really, the inflation thing is secondary. They're keeping your eyes off the prize here. The prize is that they've sold out the United States of America. Right. And the best interview on this is Tucker Carlson with Mike Benz, Benz. That guy is a genius, and he links together the whole, kit and caboodle. DOD, State Department, CIA, FBI, all working with DHS, illegal immigration, legalizing spying on Americans through DHS on a law I probably voted for when I was in Congress because they said it was about Russia. And this global order now is falling apart, right? China's finally, right? You need the free market system in the long run. You can make some good guesses early on, they did, but you can't sustain it. So they're falling apart. Now it's going to get interesting, and there's populist movements all across the world right now. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon. The people are getting really ticked off. Prices are up like crazy. Like you just got done the water example, and all these things are just crazy. But it's really the structure of the macro economy. We've let the elites run and control and determine that structure. They do not represent the American people. That immigration bill that came out of the Senate is item number one, right? Big labor wanted that, and the Chamber of Commerce voted for that. They wanted that to hurt the working poor in this country even more, right? I think they're going to be surprised at the polls. And I don't like being Pollyanna-ish. I was wrong on the last set of elections, but I think there is a bit of a wave building up here.
Jason, let me shift over to you for just a minute, because Dave was referring to the illegal immigrants in the economy. Now, official statistics say under Joe Biden, 7.2 million illegal immigrants have come in across that southern border. You and I both know that number is probably at least 50% higher than that. I mean, I've heard credible numbers saying illegal immigration in this country is now approaching 17 million people. Now, 17 million people have to have a place to stay, they have to have a place to eat, and the federal government is providing a lot of that. Cell phones, hotel rooms, 3 meals a day, transportation. I mean, a lot of things that normal Americans pay for themselves, the government is paying for the illegal immigrants. Jason, that ticks me off. What is the average person that you're talking to who's working hard every day, trying to feed their family, support their family? That's got to be driving people to pull their hair out.
Listen, for a guy who's worked 3 jobs at a time, 80 hours a week, done the 9 to 5s, done the 10 p.m.s to 5 a.m.s, all that stuff, it drives me absolutely insane. And first, let me thank Dave for having humility to say he voted on a bad bill. I got a kick out of that because, look, a lot of these are bad bills. I want to take you back to my first real taste of when I realized the immigration system was completely corrupt. It was when I was actually down in Texas, living outside of Austin. I was about to work for InfoWars. I was the first guy Alex Jones gave a talk show to. And I remember not only being around a lot of people that weren't speaking English, obviously weren't here legally, but I went to go get my Texas driver's license. And I wasn't able to because I didn't have my physical birth certificate. Now, I'm a New York guy. My birth certificate is actually out of Florida. Didn't have an original copy of it. Had a multitude of other documentation, including my New York license, my social security card, etc. And I was in just this madhouse where they were giving licenses away to people that didn't speak English. Again, this is 2008, 2009. Now, fast forward to this latest stretch of what's going on at the border. I got yet another taste of it. We met out in California, and on my flight back, I was actually coming through Phoenix. And we were going into Chicago. Again, I'm a satellite city of Chicago. I'm over in the Quad Cities. And my flight was delayed because a multitude of illegal immigrants who did not speak English, some of them teenage children on their own. I was approached by one of them. He was trying to see if I spoke any Spanish, and he was at the right terminal. Muy pequeño, let him know he was at the right spot. And, even the airline stewardesses was addressing that the government was funneling them in. They were paying for it. I took a couple pictures. They all had a little packet and ready to go. Now, even Eric Adams, who no fan of, again, I think he put on a big smiley face, said he was going to clean up New York because it was so bad at the time, made it worse out there saying, hey, we're going to take them all in. Now that's over. And he's openly saying he doesn't want sanctuary city status. And on top of that, this is at a time where there's an investigative pushback by the FBI, not only on him, but his associates. And he's still not dancing to their tune because it's that bad. And this is happening throughout America. They're getting flights all over. They're not just staying in the cities. And look, I'm not mad at these people for trying to make a better life for themselves. But while we're paying for this, while we're paying for perpetual war, what has the average citizen gotten back? You know, Mark, I'm not Mr. Donnie T. I don't necessarily love Donald Trump. I had voted for him twice, and I will say to his presidency right in the very beginning, he cut taxes. I was working one of those jobs, actually a couple of those jobs that I was talking about before, and immediately there was more money in my paycheck. Just that little bit gives such economic confidence to somebody like me and those around. That's a huge push. So, all I can say is we're not happy. I can't tell you anybody that is actually happy about the border situation, even if you take it to the left. Again, I'm a New York guy. No one's saying, hey, I like what's happening in the border. I like what's happening in the economy. I like that we have a zombie that can't talk as the president of the United States they're about to run again. None of them are saying these things, Mark.
Well, Jason, since you invoked Donald Trump and President Biden, we're going to take a break for 60. But when we come back, we're going to talk the political implications of a horrific border policy and high inflation. Be back in 60.
Hi, neighbor. Pat Boone here. Today, I want to help you find some peace of mind concerning your money. Like it or not, we're all living in a financial war zone. That's right. We're watching our hard-earned dollars get crushed by inflation. In fact, recently inflation reached its highest level in 40 years. And on top of that, cash, which has always represented freedom and privacy, is more and more being replaced by a cashless system. That's right, powerful forces are definitely waging a war against cash. So I'm encouraging you to prepare before it's too late. Call or text the number on the screen for a free report, The Secret War on Cash from Swiss America. Discover how a few simple steps can protect your money as well as your privacy and your peace of mind. So call or text for your free report, The Secret War on Cash, and make sure to mention Pat Boone sent you.
And we're back with Jason Bermas and Dave Bratt. Dave, let me turn this question to you. You're the economist here among the three of us. These economic numbers are problematic. We've just gone through the analysis of it, start of our show here. The federal government alone is $34 trillion in debt, and they're continuing to add $2 trillion of debt every year, and that's not taking into account other debt that gets up closer to the $50 trillion you referenced earlier. As a result, Joe Biden is underwater 20 points on economic issues, and that's a conservative number. Dave, tie this in for me politically. The Democrats they see what's happening. They have no desire to fix this. Heck, if there wasn't Republicans governing in one half of Congress, they'd be spending more than $2 trillion. So Dave, talk about the political implications, put your congressional hat on here, and then let's talk about how this is going to affect the 2024 election.
Yeah, no, all the political ideas are just my own. I don't speak on behalf of any party or institution or anything like that. And so, yeah, I mean, the American people have known a lot of reality for a long period of time, but a majority have been voting for Santa Claus, right? And so, it's a very cynical indictment on the American people. They know that they're putting their own kids in debt, right? Everybody says we love our kids more than anything. We've spoiled a generation, et cetera. Every generation says that. But I ran on the debt and deficits back in 2014. I ran on immigration back in 2014, right? I beat Cantor on the basis of immigration to some large extent. And that issue right now, I think, has some grip, right? That one, people are starting to learn the tragedies around the country now. The Atlanta, Georgia tragedy illegal aliens, etc., with multiple, been detained and released, and his brother, same thing. And people are getting a belly full of it. And then, on top of that, on the politics, some evidence is when you have the mayor of New York City and Chicago saying immigration is ruining my city. I mean, I think that's some evidence that you got probably an 80% issue there. And then Biden goes to the border, but is not doing anything at all. But, it's incumbent on the Republicans to offer a message. I wrote a piece in Breitbart that was interviewed last week at CPAC. And I said, everybody knows what the three issues are, right? It's the that will have an impact. It's the debt, and then we need to communicate the loss of productivity growth because we're tanking the next generation. And then issue number two, the most important one, is the border invasion. And yeah, the number's up to 15 million, et cetera. And on immigration, the corporate guys get the cheap labor. And the Manhattan Institute, Heather McDonald had a piece out a couple weeks ago. The cost of K-12 education now in Los Angeles is $50,000 per kid per year. Right. So, let's just say an illegal alien comes across the border, works, made in the image of God, by the way. This is not, an attack on this. We want the rule of law back in this country. So they come across, they make 25 grand a year or something like that. They pay no taxes, right? They're probably getting a negative income tax or getting money back, plus benefits. And then who's picking up the two kids in school for $100,000? You, right? The way education works is it's 45% locally funded, 45% state, and 10% Fed. And so you're picking up the tab for that. How you feel about that? And so the American people know what's going on. And then the third is this never-ending wars thing. This thing, I think the American people are onto this thing too, right? The Ukraine thing, supposedly for democracy, but the United States CIA did a coup d'etat back in 2014 on the Ukrainian president. So, at least tell a good story, right? I mean, if you just want power and you want to, utilize, DOD, toys and see if they still work, say that. And I don't think the American people are going to pay for it. But holding a coup d'etat and then saying I need another $100 billion for democracy is just a farce. And then, we're in multiple wars now. There's a bunch of corruption in Ukraine. I think people that follow the news know how bad that is. There's all sorts of labs and crony capitalism and Burisma and all sorts of shady things going on where they use the money. And again, that Mike Benz video is illustrative, right? Google, who now, censors people. I think there was 22 million censor hits on Facebook related to issues around the virus and elections. 22 million hits. Google was initially funded by DOD, so they're buddies, right? And so it's not just that it's a large firm making money. It's a large firm making money that's a monopoly that's tied to the defense industry and to the administrative state, and is having implications in the political realm, overriding the will of the people. So we're dealing with, this is serious stuff this round. I think the American people are finally starting to pay attention to some of this. And so hopefully it kicks in.
Jason, let me ask you, Ukraine, $60 billion, upwards of $19 billion for Israel, a smaller amount for Taiwan. That bill is held up right now. And we get an 81-year-old president down at the border yesterday, and you would think just common sense would tell me he's going to talk about the border. No, he talked about climate change. I mean, honest to God, you can't make this stuff up. What are
I'm surprised it talked at all, Mark. If you see the stories out today, it's that aides are trying to keep him out of the spotlight, and well, so I mean, let's talk about it. The man just got curb stomped by uncommitted. That's nobody in Michigan. I mean, in Dearborn, he lost outright. That's unprecedented in history. And essentially, he's running unopposed, right? I guess Dean Phillips is there, and, we should at least give him his due. But most people don't even know that because, let's be honest, Mark, if most people knew that, they're willing to vote uncommitted. They're willing to vote Dean Phillips. And while that ensues, well, again, whether you like Trump or not, he's a rock star. He has got a cult following, a base like I have never seen in politics. And I would liken it and show my age a little bit here to kind of the Howard Stern effect. When Howard Stern was at his peak, he was hated by a lot of people. But you know what? He was infinitely loved by so many more, and that's really where his power came from. And Trump's base is enormous. Again, when we talk about curb stomping, why is Haley even there when she's losing by 30 points? So there are a lot of questions. You talked about the wars. One of the things that resonates with me that Donald Trump recently talked about was blood and treasure. And basically how the blood is never worth the treasure. And guess what? We didn't really get the treasure to begin with. You remember that whole meme back in the day? Whether you like the war on terror or not, we were all going to get cheap gasoline for the rest of our lives, Mark. Well, that hasn't come true, has it? And we were going to create democracies in the Middle East. That didn't come true either. So I think we have to take a step back. We have to realize that we're constantly being gaslit. This is the most outright puppet administration I've ever lived through, my generation has ever lived through. And I'm not quite sure if we had anything like this in American history before. So, I'm hoping that common sense within the Senate and the House, especially with people like Rand Paul, Mike Lee, and others, keep bringing to attention. We can't keep funding these things, and it's a big problem on both sides of the aisle, Mark.
Jason, in Iowa, what are people saying about $60 billion for Ukraine? I mean, they see a porous border. They're saying, wait a second, we have millions of people coming across our own border. A lot of them are men that could be in the military. I mean, that's just a fact. We're not making this stuff up. They're seeing added economic pressure by the fact, as Dave was talking about, big business gets cheap labor, all the goodies, the handouts that come from the federal government that they're paying for. Jason, what are your average people? You talk to a lot of people all day long, your talk shows, your radio, your television shows. What do they feel about this aid package to Ukraine? And then, Dave, I want you to respond to that after we hear from Jason.
Well, I'm a small town guy, too. I like going out and drinking, and I see what's going around me. 2 years ago, when this started to kick off, I'll never forget, I was riding up the street. Already you were starting to see some of the bumper stickers with the Ukrainian flags. And there was an actual, it was actually pretty cold out there as well. People outside with signs, honk for Ukraine. They were pretty stoked on it. I was already kind of worried. You don't see anything like that anymore 2 years later. I'd say that died down, that nonsense, right around year one when people realized, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to beat Russia. Oh, this is going to continue on. Oh, wait, there's video of Zelensky doing some pretty shady things, if you know what I'm saying. Mark, a lot of people stopped buying into it over a year ago. And those paying attention are also not very happy with the rhetoric out there by Putin and others that are now threatening World War III and possibly nuclear war. That's not something that we've seriously discussed as a nation since the Cold War. And I would argue that right now that threat is even greater, especially in light of Putin's speeches in this last week.
Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I go back to John Mearsheimer at Chicago. He's the expert on Ukraine, and everybody should just, go back and follow him. He gave us the warning back in 08, 10, 12, 14, Crimea, Georgia, all of it. It's a big history lesson. Tucker interviews Putin. Putin goes over it. He says, Ukraine and us, we go back to, I think, the year 860 AD. So we're playing around with long-standing forces. And all of this is the U.S. for some reason choosing intentionally to poke the bear. It'd be like Russia putting something on the Mexican border for us. Putin told us he told us all the way up to this line, don't mess with Ukraine. It's a buffer, right? Ukraine can be democratic, they can get rich, you can be capitalist, but it's not going to go NATO, and don't shove it in the European Union or any of this baloney, right? The globalists just can't take that answer. For some reason, they have their own objectives, right? Funding themselves, funding weapon systems, funding the defense establishment that Eisenhower warned about. Now it's getting scary. And so Ukraine, they're Russian people. Russia itself does not want to be there, right? Russia, as Putin said a couple times in the interview, this point never gets across to the press. He said, we had a peace deal, and all they were going to get was the Donbass and that other little region down there, whatever, plus Crimea, right? That was the original peace deal, and their troops were backing off. And then the globalists say no to that, right? And now they have the gall to say that, Putin and Russia's attacking, unilaterally out of nowhere, and it's a mystery, and they're taking over. And if you oppose this nonsense, you're against democracy. I mean, it's just bizarre. And I'm not so terribly scared of Russia. I'm scared of China. And I think we need to divert all of our forces and get ready, right? All the latest evidence now says we don't even have manufacturing capacity to roll out munitions, much less sophisticated tanks that are outdated, and the fuel lasts 9 hours from what I hear on the Abrams tank, and they're getting blown up. And then our aircraft carriers are sitting ducks, and there's issues there. So the U.S. is just not serious anymore, right? We've woke and weaponized the DOD. We've got massive cultural problems. They're worried about multicolored flags instead of fighting wars. The American people, I think know this. Too many are going along with it because they want to get promoted, and we need some patriots to appear any day now.
Dave, when we come back, we're going to talk about something I know is near and dear to your heart and to your heart, Jason. Remember when Newt Gingrich put together the contract with America?
Yes.
I think it was a 10-point document. Folks, we're going to break for 60, but when we come back, Dave Bratt's got a contract with America, and Jason's going to comment on it. Be back in 60. See you in a minute.
Superfoodshouse.com. Transform your life today. We have partnered with a superfood manufacturer and offer you a one-stop destination for organic, non-GMO superfoods. At superfoodshouse.com, we offer a premium selection of nutrient-rich superfoods, from the revitalizing protein shakes to the Super Amino 23 protein tablets. These tablets help your body rapidly absorb protein, creating lean muscle and burning fat. Visit superfoodshouse.com right now and seize limited time offers on superfood products. With just a few clicks, you can have these nutritional powerhouses delivered right to your door. Superfoodshouse.com, where wellness meets convenience. Your path to a healthier lifestyle begins here.
And we're back. All right. We talked a little bit about Newt Gingrich's 10-point contract with America. Dave Bratt, you have an idea that you wanted to share with folks, and it's a very simplistic approach, but it's one that makes all the sense in the world. Please share that with our viewers and listeners.
Yeah, there's nothing novel about this. Newt, his secret sauce was you pick 80% issues that are winners across the American people, and then you run on it, and you make promises to the American people so they have something to vote for, right? So I just shared the big three. The border invasion is probably number one. The endless wars, Ukraine, all this nonsense is two. And then three is the debt and the economic picture and inflation. So those are all 80% issues. There's no debate. Anyone who takes those three issues is a winner. The problem, and what the people don't know at home, is I was in the Republican conference. There's 220 congressmen and women in that room. And our speaker, since Newt, all of our speakers have let those 220 representatives go off and run their own races on their own issues. That has been an unmitigated disaster, right? The Democrats, by contrast, spend tens of millions more than us on messaging. They run on a unified ticket. They go bananas on healthcare and all the other issues that they're so good at in Social Security, and they tell lies the whole time. And our speaker never grabs the megaphone. So I wrote a letter to Mike Johnson, who I really like. I knew him. I'm friends with him. He was a adjunct at Liberty University. right? So he's a very good man. But he needs to get a megaphone and get in under that rotunda with all the press that hangs out there every day and say, here's what we're going to do. Then those people in the nervous seats in Illinois and Boston and California, and I get that. I'm sympathetic with them. But if he does that, he'll create a 5 or 6 point buffer for those folks, because enough people in the middle will go, oh, my word, the Republicans are actually giving me something to vote for. Hallelujah. Right. And so it's pretty simple, but we never do it because we're chicken. And if we grow a backbone, I think we'll be pleasantly surprised at a very positive outcome.
Jason, you heard what Dave just said. You're more of an independent-minded person. I mean, you don't shift left, you don't shift right. You're pretty straight down the middle on a lot of issues. Critique or favorability on what Dave Bratt was just talking about?
So look, I want out of the wars big time. Obviously, economically, we have to do something. And I believe in a constitutional republic, right? The border issue to me isn't a left or right issue. We should have a secure border. But let me add on to it. One of the things that I really found appealing about Vivek Ramaswamy, who, again, I don't necessarily agree with everything on him. And I think that some of the things he's done in the past deserve question. And that's why when I got an opportunity to question him, I talked about those things, but I really admired the idea to take down that military-industrial complex that Dave was discussing earlier, that Eisenhower had warned us about, and that has clearly gotten out of control through a lot of these three-letter agencies. On day one, cut the FBI, the CIA, the NSA in half. Absolutely. Let's get rid of Homeland Security. You know, I remember living in a world without it, and I warned then in its inception that it would be turned on the American people, and that has actively happen. So I want to see a lot of these bureaucracies taken down as well. I think that's the only way we're ever going to be able to take our country back. And let's bring back accountability. Again, we have a judicial, executive, and a legislative, and I have yet to see anybody be held criminally accountable for some of the treasonous activity we've seen not only the past few years, but the past couple of decades. And, you know, we could also get into election reform and a number of other things, but I don't think those are right and left issues. And I think that most people would agree with me that if we're going to have a future where we do have free speech, where we do have ownership of property, and we do have a nation state that somewhat resembles what our founding fathers wanted for a free humanity, we're going to have to do those things, Mark.
Jason, I think you bring up some tremendous points, and I'm going to ask our former congressional representative here, Dave Bratt. Dave, we always hear about cuts. Now, I've always defined cuts from a Washington parlance as reductions in the increase of spending. That drives people absolutely crazy. What do you mean a cut is a reduction from an increase in spending? And Dave, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've never in my adult life seen the government shrink. I mean, I don't know if this statistic is right. I heard it coming out of a military channel the other day. The Pentagon has like 800,000 employees or some astronomical number. Dave, you were in Congress. You did defeat Eric Cantor based upon border and some economic issues. I remember when it happened. It was an earthquake that hit Washington. How in the current makeup of Congress, where you have an ideological Democratic Party, they vote lockstep and barrel from the most liberal Democrat to the most conservative. There is no ambiguity whatsoever. And in that way, on our side of the ledger, Dave, with that tiny margin that we have, with a Democrat in the White House, is there any chance we can extract cuts, real cuts, or is it going to take the Republicans this fall winning the presidency, the Senate, and the House?
No, we could. I mean, that's part of my challenge to the speaker. We've never even moved the ball toward using minimal leverage, right? McCarthy, the last time around, gave Biden, right? This is, a year ago, went up to the White House and gave him a COVID budget of $7 trillion. Right back when I was in, it was 4.5 or 5 trillion, not too long ago. Now we had a COVID disaster. And we kept the COVID spending. Every sane economist in the world, even the lefties, knew, well, surely we're going to cut the COVID spending, these extra trillions, off when COVID's done. You can't run stimulus forever, right? Even Keynes said that way back, when he devised the post-World War II order, right? You run, right. You build up a stimulus in case you get in terrible times, like a surplus, and then in the down times you got something to use. But we're now continually running a COVID budget, and this is because the American people want it, and that's what's so hard. And what Jason just said, there was all right, taking down the administrative state, that's huge, but the speaker and the Republicans have not equipped the American people to understand any of that. I wish they did. It's starting to get there. The base is starting to understand it. So you're getting about 20% now, of the country that's starting to get those issues. But that's the work of the president and and when you restack the staff of the White House and the executive agencies, hopefully we do a better job aligning the personnel next time. And then hopefully the Speaker of the House and the head of the Senate, which we had both when I was in, they don't nuke Trump. They didn't want him to be successful. They didn't give him any wins. We had the House and the Senate and the White House and didn't do a thing on immigration. We gave tax cuts to the rich. Shocker. All right. So, that's fine. But that's all we got done. And then we lied on the Obamacare repeal. We promised we're going to do that for 7 years, and we didn't do it. And so I know Jason's going to stay on with you. I got to jump to the meeting, and I look forward to being on the show again, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Hey, Dave, thank you for joining me. It's always a pleasure having you. And thanks for the initial Saturday Schaftlein report on Patriot.tv. Right. We're going to take a 60-second break right now. And when we come back, we're going to talk politics and the implication, is Joe Biden going to be the Democratic nominee? Back in 60.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most private assets, silver and gold.
Call Kirk Elliott, PhD at 877-547-5743. That's 877-KIRK-PhD.
And we're back. Jason, we found ourselves in a very odd situation here. And I got to share this with the rest of the country and around the globe for all our viewing and listening audience. Most of you are probably thinking, well, California is the deepest blue of blue states. And it's true. But there's a political earthquake happening out here right now, Jason. And let me share with you what's happening here. There's a jungle primary on Tuesday in California, and there's 4 people running for the United States Senate seat. The previous polling leader was a gentleman named Adam Schiff. I know our audience is already throwing darts, they're throwing rocks, they're ready. What, Mark? What are you talking about? Adam Schiff. I'll tell you why. The Adam Schiff, who lied in Russia. He lied. He is, when the man opens his mouth, he lies. That is Adam Schiff, and that's the man that was leading in this primary. We have a second Democrat. Now, let me give you his numbers. Schiff was polling at about 28%. And the way it works out here, 4 people running. If you don't get 50%, they take the top 2 vote getters. In second place was a representative from Orange County named Katie Porter. She is the definition of a liberal Democrat. She doesn't quite carry the baggage Adam Schiff has, but she's not as smart as Schiff either. The third Democratic candidate was Barbara Lee. She's been polling under 10%. Don't really think she's going to be much of a factor. The fourth major candidate is someone many of you may be familiar with. His name is Steve Garvey. He used to be the first baseman for the Los Angeles Dodgers, won multiple World Series titles, is a Hall of Famer in baseball. Well, it just so happens that Steve Garvey is a conservative Republican. And when the race started out, Garvey was hovering around 15%. Well, when the polling came out about a week to 10 days ago, Schiff was still holding his 28 to 30%. Steve Garvey had come up to 20%. Katie Porter had fallen back to about 17, 18%. Barbara Lee was nowhere to be found. All of a sudden, I'm driving around, Jason, and I'm hearing these commercials on the radio because we drive into the studio in the office, and these commercials are praising Steve Garvey. He voted for Donald Trump twice. He's against Medicare for all. He supports building a wall at the border. He's a MAGA Republican. And I'm thinking, man, whoever did these commercials for Steve Garvey, that's pretty good. They're representing. And then at the end, it says, this commercial was paid for by Adam Schiff. And I'm like, holy moly. Now, let me fast forward. And this is why I'm saying, folks, hold your seats, buckle up. And Jason, this is where I want to get your reaction. Polling came out today from not exactly a conservative outfit, the Los Angeles Times. Fresh off the presses today, folks. Steve Garvey is at 28%. Adam Schiff is at 25%. Katie Porter's at 20%. Barbara Lee nowhere to be found. Jason, what is the political impact if a Republican who's running on ads financed by Adam Schiff wins the California primary on Tuesday?
I haven't seen the ad, so I don't know if this is dark humor or unself-awareness. But once again, first of all, you live in California, so yeah, it might be very liberal, but there are big sections in northern and rural California that lean right. Now, let's add to something that I've talked about for decades now, the celebritard culture kind of impact of anybody famous. Now, look, I played Little League as a kid. I went through high school, tried to play in college. I loved baseball, well aware of Steve Garvey, and he was a hell of a player. Even then, I knew that he liked the ladies, and I'm sure that those are going to be the types of scandals that they go after him for. But again, if you look at the modern Republican Party, look at Donald Trump, candidates are able to withstand that. I like a lot of what Garvey says politically. I haven't seen those ads, but I have been paying attention to his political run. Whether or not he can deliver, we'll see. It is California. That is a hotbed for political corruption. And I don't know what kind of temptations or obstacles are going to be out there. But to me, anything is better than Adam Schiff. I would hate to think that this is a sleeper they want to put in that is going to be some kind of a surrogate for a Schiff agenda. But I guess time will tell. But I think that Garvey, especially as it stands right now, is very electable, Mark.
Well, I think he is electable. Now, the problem you're going to have here in California, this is a jungle primary. So if you sort of combine, if the votes came out the way the LA Times is telling you it's going to come out, Democrats would get 420, 45, about 50-ish, 5% of the vote. Garvey, roughly 30. You got another 15% that have to break some way. But then what happens, I think, Jason, it would be such the political earthquake. Garvey would still be the underdog if it comes down to a Garvey-Schiff match. Right now, if the polling is correct, folks, and the LA Times, again, it's no conservative bastion, but if they're right, and Garvey comes in a close second or he wins, you're going to see Garvey and Adam Schiff come in the fall. And I got to tell you something. It's a deep blue state, but people are seeing the border overrun in San Diego. They're seeing these high prices. They're seeing a state of California that has a $68 to $70 billion budget deficit with all the good things that are going on. A high tax rate. But again, Garvey's running on common sense issues. So I'm not predicting what's going to happen on Tuesday, but I'm saying, Jason, if Steve Garvey beats Adam Schiff and Katie Porter and Barbara Lee in that primary on Tuesday, you know who's going to start feeling the heat? That's right, President Joe Biden. And Jason, you've seen calls growing. I mean, this is no surprise to anyone that watches Patriot TV. We've talked about it extensively. The calls for Joe Biden to step aside if Steve Garvey beats Adam Schiff in California Tuesday, I'm just going to venture to say they're going to grow a little bit louder. And I know everybody's favorite savior is Governor Gavin Newsom. I'm not so sure about that because if the state of California is having any kind of shift, and folks, it would take an earthquake type shift to elect a Republican to a statewide race in California. Hadn't happened in a long time. But Jason, what's the implication for Joe Biden if a Republican pulls off a win in California in the Senate race?
Well, I guess that depends on whether we actually have a presidential election in 2024, right? We're 8 months out, right? Like, time keeps on ticking into the future. We've kind of talked about this. Nobody can just weigh in now and get in on the ballot, right? There were the whispers of Newsom and still of Michelle Obama. And I would argue that, you know, Biden was even starting to be taken to the cleaners by media pundits on the left prior to what went down between Israel and Palestine, and now is what is happening in Gaza. And let's be honest, there is a large section on the left that is anti-war no matter what, and has made this issue their particular issue for a very long time. So a lot of the people that were willing to even grin and bear it and just kind of suggest we need somebody else out there, well, now they're in full protest mode, and it's hard to bring Joe Biden anywhere in the public arena where he's not being shouted down. This is a big, big problem if they plan to run him. Now, again, will we have the election in 2024? Another thing that's really important about a Senate election, and something you get in Garvey or someone else like that in there, is maybe you get a little bit more checks and balances in a very corrupt voting system. I know we're not supposed to have the mail-in ballots this time around, but I have been talking for, again, the better part of 2 decades about the machines, whether or not they're just digital machines that you're casting your vote in, no ballot at all, or a counting machine. We've seen no regulation via those machines. And let's be honest, Mark, we didn't see any real audits in the 2020 election. Here we are on the tail end of the last election cycle into the new one, right? And we're just seeing things come up in court cases in 2024 regarding our national presidential elections that had all the hallmarks, all the visuals of being the most corrupt and stolen election of all time, Mark. So look, I don't know what's on the bingo card, but I bet it's going to be something wild.
Well, let me throw a couple things out to you here, and I do want to address some of these pieces we brought up. I'm of the belief that we are going to have an election this fall. I'm of the belief, and I have been dating back a year, that the 2 principal candidates are going to be Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, it's going to take something more than Biden being senile. It's going to take more than Biden not being able to even answer questions at a press conference. It's just, as you mentioned, just the sheer inability based upon the needing to get the delegates. I just don't see that. And think about this too. The Democrats, they are not stupid, folks. I know we disagree with their policies, but when you look at the last few elections, they've whipped our butts. I mean, you may disagree with it, but they're in power other than the House, and we're not. Okay, they control the Senate, we don't. Now, if they go to that Democratic convention and Joe Biden's upside down in all 7 swing states by more than he is right now, and I'm going to get into those numbers in a minute with you, then there could be a movement to change the nominee at the convention. Now, I'm going to give you a history lesson here. Really, the last time that happened was 1968, where Lyndon Baines Johnson dropped out before the convention. And look what happened. This was in Chicago. I know many of you weren't born, but I was around then, okay? There were riots. People got killed. There was mayhem. The Democratic Party was in tatters. And they got their butt handed to them by Richard Nixon in the 1968 election. And Nixon went on to win again in 1972. The Democratic Party has a fond memory of what happens when you take a sitting president and excommunicate him from office. So I also have this belief. I don't think the Democrats want any part of Kamala Harris as the, quote, heir apparent coming in. Folks, as bad as Joe Biden polls, she's worse. And I will share this just as an American here. I disagree with Joe Biden on virtually every policy. I think the man is way past his prime. I think he'd have a difficulty passing a cognitive test. But if you said to me, Mark, you got to have one of two presidents, Joe Biden or Kamala Harris, to me, that's a no-brainer. Okay. I mean, it just is. I think she is woefully unqualified for the position she's in. If you think back when she ran in the primary last time, folks, she got 0 delegates. She couldn't even make it out of Jason's home state of Iowa and got no votes, had to withdraw before the caucuses. And we won't get into why she's the vice president. You could do a whole show on that. But let me fast forward on these thoughts here. And Jason, I know you're laughing what I'm saying, but I really believe it's going to take something catastrophic. And when I look at these 7 to 8 swing state polls, I see some polls showing Donald Trump up in Pennsylvania. I saw one today where Joe Biden's up by 0.5 point. The late, great Rush Limbaugh used to always talk about Pennsylvania. And he said, you know, we always get polling leads in Pennsylvania. And other than the 2016 election, when Donald Trump did win Pennsylvania narrowly, Pennsylvania has proven to be fool's gold for us. We put a ton of resources in there, and we always eke out a loss. I remember going to bed in the 2020 election, and Donald Trump was leading by 600,000 votes in Pennsylvania. Didn't quite turn out that way, did it? I still have my doubts about Wisconsin and Michigan. Those are Michigan, I feel a little bit better about. Wisconsin, a little better. Trump's surging in Wisconsin. He's gaining in Michigan. The question is, will all the uncommitted turn around and vote for Trump? Jason, I've spilled a lot of beans here. You know, give me your reaction to my prognostications here.
You know, 1,000% where you went at the end there. That was exactly what I was going to say. Look how many people voted in Michigan, supposedly where Trump lost, and I believe there was a high level of corruption. Look, I'm going to be flat out with you, Mark. I believe in 2016, they tried to steal the election through fractional voting and these machines and relatively no audits, but this guy was just so incredibly popular, he beat the algorithm time and time again, and that's really why they needed this new apparatus of mail-in ballots. Let's be honest, you know, I'm a guy that comes from upstate New York, but very close to Pennsylvania. So, you know, Binghamton, about 60 minutes away, right on that border, over by Scranton. And I got to tell you, when you're in those areas, even the cities of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, these are people that are Second Amendment folks. In many cases, they're not quite, you know, socially liberal, maybe, but still have a lot of the conservative family values, still value agriculture, farming, nature, a lot of what middle America also values. And, you know, again, call me a conspiracy theorist. I have a hard time believing that they voted in Fetterman, not just because, again, he could barely speak at the time, coming off the stroke, but he, again, went up against a very legitimate celebrity. And we just love celebrities in this country, Mark. So when Dr. Oz ran, to me, that should have been a shoo-in. And when he wasn't elected, that again, glaringly tells me we do not have free and fair elections in this country and that we need some kind of real audits. And, you know, I'm going to go back to something you said about Richard Nixon. Now, I know that America has a love affair with John F. Kennedy, and he said and did some things that were very good and may have cost him his life for sure. He probably lost to Nixon. And he probably only won because of ballot box stuffing and their association with the Chicago Mafia. Right. So, you know, elections have always been controversial, always needed to be monitored, and always tried to be stolen. But now the mechanisms are out of control. And you talked about whether you want Kamala Harris or Biden, and you'll take Biden every day of the week. Yeah, Kamala is a scary social climbing, you know, predator class minion that was willing to literally sleep her way to the top to get into those positions. She was the mistress of Willie Brown, the San Francisco mayor, and one of the big time members of that left coast establishment. So look, I like none of the choices on the left right now, even though I can be skeptical of the people being put out there. on the right, Donald Trump, Vivek Ramaswamy, who he's going to choose for his vice presidential candidate. But there are just so many more variables on this one this time around, Mark, especially with the indictments and the possibility of jail. Again, anybody's bingo card is up. And again, we talked about global warfare. We've talked about the border, the wrong kind of emergency, and everything's turned on its head, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, that's a good way to close it out, Jason, because there are so many factors that are going in. Think about between now and October, November, and I use 2 months because people vote as early as October. So many things could happen. There's so many variables up in the air. And I got to caution all our viewers and listeners, even though Trump is leading in 6, 7 of the 8 swing states, take these poll numbers with a grain of salt because they can change in an instant. We got about a minute left, Jason. Let's talk a little bit about Patriot TV. You had mentioned Vivek Ramaswamy, and I want to give a big plug out to General Mike Flynn, Brannon House, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who was debuting on Patriot.tv earlier this week. And I know he was your choice of preferred candidate in Iowa, and he acquitted himself quite well. What a straight shooting, he's a humble guy. And whether he's the vice president or a member of Donald Trump's cabinet, Vivek Ramaswamy is a guy that's going to be around our political life for a long time. 30 seconds, Jason. Patriot TV, making sense of the madness. Close it out for us today.
Yeah, I do a morning show over here at Patriot.tv, interview some really interesting people. This week we had Joe Allen, the author of Dark Eon, on about transhumanism. We just had Miriam Hanane on coming up next week, where we were talking about George Floyd and revisiting that event. And really, look, I'm a straight shooter down the line. I'm skeptical of everybody, but I will praise you when you do the right thing. And I think that's what we got to do if we want to take this country back, Mark.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Well, folks, that's it for our initial Saturday show. We will be back. Saturdays, you'll see us. Sundays, you'll see us. And most importantly, catch our great guest show host lineup Monday through Friday. We've got some fabulous people. Got a brand new one debuting next week, in addition to Jason Lewis, Brannon House, Roger Stone, Jason Bermas, who you just saw. Fabulous people on Patriot TV. Get with Patriot TV, and we will see you soon. Thanks for viewing. Thanks for listening. See you soon.